Hi, my name is Brittany Rudish, and I'm a speechwriter at the U.S. Embassy in Poland. And I also have the privilege of hosting this awesome virtual series that we are now in our third series, our third conversation. And this one, perhaps maybe saving the best one yet, because we also are on the eve of International Women's Day. So this is the perfect time to have this conversation. So welcome in everyone to the Inspire, Empower, Lead series here at the U.S. Embassy. Wherever you are in the world, hello. And today's conversation, we are speaking with Professor Missy Cummings. She's the director of Mason Autonomy and Robotics Center at George Mason University. Her resume speaks for itself, right? So on top of that, she also has a background working as an engineer and also one of the US Navy's first female fighter pilots. So a lot of things that we can talk about today. It's going to be very interesting. Before we though get to the conversation, just want to give you some background of how things will flow today for those that have not been a part of this conversation in the past. Number one, I'm sure you've heard the recording message that was started right when you joined the room. And so this will be recorded and we'll be using it for other purposes, and just wanting to make sure that is shared with everyone at this point. Also, I know a lot of you have submitted questions in advance, and thank you so much for your engagement and participating in this so early on. So that has been incorporated in what we will be talking about today. I'm sure you noticed that your microphones have been muted, but please, 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 I want you to partake in this conversation. We want you to be involved. So in order to do that, you can just drop a message in the chat. You can comment, relay questions, really anything that you have that's relevant to what we're talking about. We want you to be involved in this as well. All right, I think that should move us on to the important stuff. So first up, Professor, welcome, hello. So glad you are here with us today. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
All right, so I suppose we need to explain your background. I gave a little bit of the resume, and I know we shared this too via email for the invitations, but how does one go from being a fighter pilot in the Navy to then being an AI expert and working in academia? How did this happen, and kind of give us a little background of who you are?
Yeah, I know it's an unusual path, but I think once you hear why, it will make complete sense to you. So I was a pilot for the Navy in the 1990s. And I first flew A4s, which are very analog aircraft. And then I transitioned to the F-18, which are really the country's first digital aircraft. And so, I'm kind of like old way, new way. And then one of the things that really amazed me about flying a digital fly-by-wire aircraft was the fact that there were so many accidents, and it was all human error, all humans struggling to understand what the automation was doing. And it became clear to me that as a fighter pilot, one day my job would be completely automated, because I could see it coming. By that time I had my master's degree. And so at some point, and it was really, after I spent 3 years flying the F-18, on average, one person a month died in a training accident because they didn't understand the automation. So that's a lot of people. And so that's what motivated me to go back to school to the University of Virginia, where I got my PhD, and then I went into academia from there.
So regarding the Navy component, are you involved in helping remedy the issues that had occurred in the past? Did you kind of relay any information that you've learned? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, sort of, I was one of the early researchers really pushing forward unmanned aerial systems, which you call drones. So the answer is yes, I was really trying to change the system, but changing it by getting the human out of the cockpit, which doesn't make me a really popular person with some circles. But I think if you take the long view, and indeed many countries have said, Israel, the US, many countries have said, look, Humans as pilots in military aircraft, it's a thing of the past.
Regarding where you're at now at George Mason University, I know that you're kind of spearheading and piloting, may I use that word, kind of fits the context, but piloting this new era of AI in academia at the university. So what is your purpose and what are you doing currently now in your role?
Well, I run the Mason Autonomy and Robotics Center, which is to say, you know, I do a lot of AI and robotics, you know, so I have what I'm trying to do with the center, and then I have my own individual research projects. At the center level, you know, I'm really trying to grow a robotics effort at George Mason. It's a new R1 university, and that means that before it was primarily a teaching university, and now they're trying to transition to a major research university. So trying to help them learn all the lessons that they need to know to do that, but also trying to grow both research and education. And on the education front, we're starting, in fact, we just started a whole new responsible AI program. And for the people on this call, yes, we are eventually, hopefully within the year. Right now it's in person, but we're going to try to get it online very quickly because the demand has been so great for people to get a certificate in responsible AI. And that means that you learn not just about the ethics and policy and governance of AI, but you also learn the hardcore technical aspects. How do we test it? What is risk management? How do I mitigate the risk? How do I know what the technical ramifications are of perception systems inside robots? So, you know, we're doing a lot on the education front with the Responsible AI program. And me personally, I do a lot of research in, you know, how can we better do AI creation? So I do a lot in how do we do better labeling of data? How do we understand human errors in the labeling of data? How do we get subjectivity and bias out of the building of models? How do we stop deception in terms of large language models, ChatGPT, that kind of thing? So it's pretty busy.
For the Responsible AI program, you're saying that's still in the works, but for those that are interested, where would be the best place for them to find information once this is finalized?
Well, it's finalized. It's a real
finalized.
program. Yes.
Great.
And if you were in Washington, D.C. area, you could take it for real. Right now it's in person. But like I said, we've had an overwhelming deluge of requests for it to be online. So we're trying to figure out right now how to get all the people lined up and how to start delivering that course content.
So in that case, then people can just monitor the websites at George Mason University if they're interested in getting more information.
Yeah, if you'll follow me on LinkedIn and just go to Missy Cummings at LinkedIn, I make a lot of announcements there when we get these educational programs up and running.
Great, thank you. So regarding AI, I know you've delved into the responsible component of it, sort of some of the things that we're working with and everybody's thinking about. But I think a lot of folks don't fully grasp, at least sometimes I don't, AI and how really integrated it is in every component of our lives. I think there's things that we're using with AI that we don't even know. So really, in I guess the simplest terms, how is AI shaping our world right now at this moment?
Well, I just dropped in my LinkedIn profile for those of you who want to look at the chat. You know, so it's hard for me to say exactly. You know, I have more of a sense of what's happening with AI in America than I do in Poland. But I would say that, you know, in America, the most tangible daily use is not actually large language models, although maybe depending on which search engine you use, maybe you kind of inadvertently use a large language model that way. But there's actually quite a bit in cars, and not just Teslas, which are in America, they are the most advanced AI that people would be exposed to on a daily basis. But increasingly, you're finding computer vision inside of more and more cars with advanced driving features. So that's probably the first place, although different countries have different regulations. So for example, I'm not sure about Poland, but in England, you cannot have the same full self-driving and autopilot features that you can have in America, because it's so dangerous that the regulators in the UK will not let that happen. And they won't even let full self-driving be called full self-driving, or let autopilot be called autopilot. Indeed, in the UK, it's called co-pilot, I think. So, but the other place would be search engines. ChatGPT is increasingly being used. Google's version of that is Gemini. And to be quite honest, you know, as a more senior professor, and I'm sure all those senior people on the call are going to appreciate this, you're asked to generate a lot of useless reports that maybe one or two people will read. And so ChatGPT is my favorite way to generate useless reports. My workload, it really helps me generate what I call content-free material, stuff that you have to do for work, but nobody really wants to read it. And it's a great application. I actually have a lot of foreign students, and I require my students to use ChatGPT or some other large language model to check their papers, because the grammar by ChatGPT is going to be far, 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 far better, even than my American speaking students. They're terrible writers, all of them, no matter where they come from. And so, you know, these large language models are in effect helping guide students and letting them know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So, you know, I'm not, sorry, I'm not one of these professors who cares. I don't care that, you know, people say, oh, well, they're cheating and they're plagiarizing. No, they're not, because I know when they're using ChatGPT, because normally their papers would be terrible. And then as soon as they get something that's semi-readable, I know that they're using it. And the other way I know that they're using it is because, you know, ChatGPT and other large language models, they have a very almost formal way of writing, a way that normal people, students especially, would never write. And they also hallucinate every now and then and stick in things that aren't true. So what's pretty interesting is I can always tell when they're cheating, because they won't pay close attention. And then ChatGPT will say something ridiculous inside their papers, and you know, I'll fail them if I catch that, right? So I'm pretty hardcore, because I want them to appreciate these tools can be useful and you should use them when appropriate. But you always need to babysit these technologies. You cannot let them just do anything on their own, because the propensity for error is high. And that's true for students trying to use this for assignments, but it's also true for companies who try to use this in their daily work processes.
It's interesting that you're fully embracing it, because it seems like a lot of folks in academia are very hesitant of encouraging students sometimes to use it, especially with papers, because of this cheating element, right? But that's fascinating that you have a way of kind of identifying when it's real and when it's ChatGPT's wording. So interesting there. So regarding the academia component, because there's a lot of, you know, there's professors here on this call, there's students here on this call from Poland. What is your advice of integrating these tools into the curriculum, into academia, into the classroom more, just beyond the papers, and having students use it to help with, you know, spell check?
Yeah, you know, I think first of all, I think the people who are upset, the professors and other, you know, teachers, instructors everywhere, may be upset about this because they just don't understand it. And so I think we tend to have a fear or a dislike of things that we don't understand. So as a technologist, you know, I mean, I get it. I get why it's good and when it's good and when it's bad. You know, beyond helping people improve their writing skills, because it can just introduce errors in so many unexpected places, I think we can also use these models, large language models, to teach critical thinking and to teach double checking and triple checking. And this is going to be the future. If you're going to use these kind of error-prone neural nets and all neural nets are error prone, whether or not we're talking about computer vision or we're talking about large language models. So we've just got to get it into the heads of the young people who are going to be leaders one day, but also the leaders of today. That's one of the reasons why we also do short courses in our responsible AI class, because people need education right now. Here's a good example. Air Canada had a LLM-based chatbot who had an interaction with a customer and told the customer the wrong process for filing for grief fares. Like when someone dies, right? You can get a discount on your airline ticket. So it gave the person the wrong instructions. The person followed the chatbot instructions, and then Air Canada refused to refund the money because it said that it was the consumer's fault for not double checking the chatbot. And they went to court, and the court ruled in favor of the consumer and really scolded Air Canada terribly because, you know, and this is what's happening. Like, you want to use these technologies, you want to replace humans with these very unreliable, error-prone technologies. You can't then, try to divorce yourself from the liability that goes along with that. And so I think this Air Canada ruling is just the canary in the coal mine to other companies and academia. Like, you know, there's good uses for these technologies, but you really need to sit on top of them because they cannot at all be trusted.
So you bring up critical thinking skills for students. What else should students be learning now? I know this is kind of an overarching question, but like perhaps let's just base it in universities, right? What should students, you know, in particular here in Poland, be learning? What should they be focusing on to prepare for this new future that they're encountering?
Well, yeah, and I'm a big fan of, regardless of your background, I think everyone needs to have a class in some kind of level of programming. So, and if you're a non-technical major, you can still get some basic and learn how to do basic programming. It's logic. It's not like it's complicated math. And so I think getting familiarity with how computers work and how they reason and where they make mistakes is critical for the technology literacy of the future. And, and for those people who are taking the technical classes, they also need programming. And so as an engineer, I believe that, a couple of years of programming should just be part of everyone's training, because while engineers may not need to do complex, the layers that you will see in a large language model, for example, everyone uses a program, at least in America, called Python. And you need to know a little bit of programming to use Python. And it's very helpful for you just to have that kind of familiarity and ability to read code and what we call pseudocode, which is, a high level representation of code, to make sure that you understand the logic behind systems. And why that's critical is a couple of years ago, I was helping the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration do self-driving car investigations. And I had to sit down with a company who had had an accident, and they were actually showing me lines of code. And it was critical that I be able to understand. I could see it in the code. I could see where they made a mistake. And if you don't have, if you're going to be that kind of a person that's a technical expert, then you've got to have some literacy in coding.
And Angeniska asked a question here in the chat, and we already sort of kind of addressed it, but it does lead me to something else too that I think is very pertinent here, because Angeniska mentions pre-AI generation, right? Using AI, for research and other elements, but we talk about this pre-AI generation. The hard part here is there's a lot of students, right? The younger generation is getting these skill sets, but what about people that are, midpoint in their career where technology is evolving and maybe they're not up to date yet? What's the best way for these folks to get up to speed and not feel left behind?
Well, so this is one of the reasons that I developed this certificate program at George Mason in responsible AI, was to speak specifically to that skill set, the mid-level skill set of people who have some technical training, but they need to reskill, upskill, And, you know, it's just a reality that this field moves very quickly. And indeed, you know, there is a lot of debate over whether or not traditional four-year degrees are really preparing people for the future. You know, I still think we need four-year degrees, and it's important to get a good fundamental basis of understanding, but then we've got to have the ability for people to rapidly upskill when new technologies evolve, like we're seeing with large language models. This is definitely not going to be the last that we hear of these kinds of technologies that will emerge. They seem to just pop out of nowhere, but, you know, if you've been inside the business like I've been, you know, I mean, this is long in coming. You know, I think that maybe they released the technology a little too early, but I think that there were some financial reasons that they did that. But that's why it's even more important to make sure you have the skill set to know, you know, at least how to learn and how to upskill yourself. And I just dropped in chat if you want to read all my papers, they're at you can find them here, and then I'll drop in the chat the responsible AI link so people can see that as well.
Great, thank you so much for that. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question that probably doesn't have an easy answer. Okay, the problem that tends to always continue to be part of the conversation, it keeps coming up because this is a worldwide thing that we're dealing with. Artificial intelligence isn't just a United States, you know, challenge and opportunity. It's also a Poland challenge and opportunity. It's also a China challenge and opportunity, right? So how do we regulate it?
Well, this is, I mean, there is no one easy answer. And that is because even though neural nets, there's some commonality to all neural nets, how you need to regulate them really depends on how they're used. And so you would regulate AI in vehicles different than you would regulate them in planes, different than you would regulate them in financial systems. And so this is why it's critical for so many mid-level managers to have the ability to upskill, because indeed those are the people in all these different places that need to get a new skill set. And, you know, at a federal level, at a national level, you know, I think countries need to have a good understanding of data privacy, for example. What are the best practices? One of the things that's happening in Europe is that Europe is not really while they're not the home of really innovative AI, new forms of AI, what Europe is doing right and better than the United States is governance and regulation. And so I think that, I think that's good, because I think it serves as a checks and balances. You know, a lot of the wild, crazy ideas are coming out of America, and then the Europeans are over there saying, not so fast. We're going to start layering in, you know, more user-centric, privacy-centric regulations that allow you not to roll over consumers like potentially they're doing in America.
I bring up the regulation component because I think a lot of people these days look at AI, yes, again, as opportunity, but there's a hot button issues surrounding AI with, you know, disinformation, fueling, you know, division in society, all these other things, fake news. So, you know, from your opinion, as someone who's in the nitty gritty of all of this, like, what are some of the obstacles that we are encountering? What are some of the threats with AI that you see that need to be, you know, addressed, identified, that we need to be paying attention to?
Well, cybersecurity is a huge one. You know, even if you put aside the misinformation and disinformation, which is huge, the cybersecurity aspect is just so profound. And indeed, I'm doing some research. Many academics are trying to look at the cybersecurity implications. You know, in large language models, people getting the wrong information into the hands of malevolent actors is a problem. So we need to think about that. And then, of course, there's the disinformation and misinformation, which happens even accidentally. It's not even, people don't even have to be trying to put out misinformation and disinformation, but they do. And so I saw a comment in the chat, about using these technologies to enable maybe people, disadvantaged people. The problem with doing that, so for example, is, no large language model can do math. They can't, and they shouldn't. And so I worry that we put too much faith in these technologies, just like Air Canada did, without realizing that, for example, when you do math in ChatGPT, it will get a close approximation, but it's still not correct. And if you're adding numbers and you get something close but not correct, you could actually end up doing some substantial damage. So I do worry that people are too willing to use these tools without understanding the full implications.
So again, this goes back to this education component and this responsible AI and the programs that you're initiating and have started to, but now, bringing it to more people is really helpful, because informing folks seems like the answer, really.
Right.
So regarding these threats that the world is facing with AI, and also, again, the opportunities, I want to reiterate that. How do you think, from a democracy standpoint, how do we safeguard democracies? How do people here in Poland safeguard democracies? Because this is such a big picture thing. How can someone take on this themselves at home, or maybe teach their kids, their young kids, how to be more informed in this area?
Well, I think education, it typically lags these kinds of new innovations, just like government regulation lags. So, I think that if I think at parents, I feel, I don't know how their parents do it, right? I do this on a daily basis. And I have a daughter in high school, and, she's forever, being naive and believing too many technologies. And, I feel like I'm on top of things. What's it like for parents who don't have the technical background? How do they stay on top of things? And so, in addition to the education programs that we need to teach people in secondary and higher education about these tools, it would be good to start teaching parents and other people who are responsible. How do we teach people in the medical industry, for example, about how not to use these search engines to do some kind of diagnosis and the problems that can come from that? So, I think we've all got our hands full. I tell people, do not trust any generative AI system, and always verify. That is just the rule that we're going to start needing pretty much for social media and for any information that you see on the internet anywhere. Don't trust it and verify it.
Don't trust, verify. So I hope everyone takes that away from this conversation. Let's remember that and lock that away. It's key. I do want to bring in, Christoph asked a question here in the chat, so let's incorporate this. Obviously, the components of risk, this piggybacks off of that. The most obvious are fake news, fake movies. What are some other not obvious risks that AI can bring? You brought up the medical community. Is there anything else too that we should be thinking about here?
I mean, if you can think of the risk, it is a problem, right? How would, it's tax season in America. If you rely on ChatGPT or any other large language model to give you advice about what to do with your taxes, you're likely going to get in trouble. If you're doing a real estate transaction and you ask it, look, I want you to tell me, what are the city rules about this particular piece of property? You can't trust it. You have to verify it. And so in a lot of cases, if that's the problem, then, it's questionable whether you should be using these technologies at all. But I want to be clear. Look, I use these large language models all the time to generate content that doesn't, that people's livelihoods are not dependent on. But if it's in a safety critical path, I just ignore it. And I think that we're going to have to make sure that people everywhere understand these issues.
We have another question in here that goes back to education, and I want to bring this in because this also talks to the parents and educating them as well. What is your advice on getting parents involved in this that are largely afraid of new technologies or do not understand them? I mean, I would say that's a cultural component, right? You know, there's even just from a community standpoint, but how do you do that? Because some folks are scared of things they don't know. Any advice there?
Well, you know, in America, we have the ability, and basically the grants that we write, we try to also include a teach the teachers kind of program where we bring teachers in and we try to help them understand what they should be communicating to middle and high school students. You know, so it's kind of a hit or miss even in the US. I have no idea what that's like for Poland. Although I will say what is good for Poland is that you're smaller, and typically countries that are smaller and have, you know, do not have the breadth of complex issues that we have, you know, you're more straightforward, your agencies are smaller. I find that smaller countries typically can get a better grip on these issues faster and with less cost because, you know, first of all, you can watch the mistakes that we're making in America and not make those mistakes. And then you can be a little bit more efficacious in the application of your laws.
Good advice. Let's move away from the risks and the threats, because again, there's a lot of potential here too. So I want to transition into the conversation about AI and business, because there are some entrepreneurs here on the call, people that have businesses or have big dreams of expanding. So I'm just curious from your perspective, you know, from an AI standpoint, we talk about academia, but how can it really move businesses forward? How can it make them more innovative? How can AI make things more cost effective, more efficient? I know there's a lot of answers perhaps that could be shared with this, but you know, there's a lot of potential for AI and businesses in that collaboration. Seems like it has to be incorporated, right, in the business model these days. It has to be a part of who a business is.
Well, you know, I tell businesses all the time, if you feel that way, if you feel like it has to be integrated, you're definitely going to have problems, and it's definitely going to hurt you. Because I see that companies that feel pressured into trying to keep up with the Joneses, that's an expression in America, to make sure, you know, you're in there with everybody who's hyping the technology, you're going to make mistakes because there's not enough guardrails inside of companies to make sure that they're doing appropriate use of AI. That is, that they know when to use it and when not to use it. And so I would really caution everyone, regardless, wherever you are, education, government, business, do not trust and verify.
What is the most important role of AI in entrepreneurship? What are your thoughts there?
Well, you know, I mean, I think it's critical that people understand, you know, how to create businesses. I do tend to see in most AI entrepreneurial programs that they do not emphasize at all the testing and safety aspect. And so, you know, I think and it's, of course, like, you know, if you're going to be in an entrepreneurial and innovation program, you're there to create business. You're there not to find reasons not to create a business. That being said, though, if you don't understand the strengths and weaknesses of a system, then, you know, you're going to end up creating a system that is very dangerous potentially, or at the very least, you're going to have a lot of problems and invest a lot of money that doesn't end up anywhere. So it's just really important that people understand really early on the limits of a technology so that they can figure out how to then mitigate those risks and be successful.
And another question we also got submitted in advance that I hope you can answer here is key challenges for AI startup companies. There's a huge number of startup companies here in Poland that have been very successful thus far, and more coming for sure. So what are the challenges for them? And especially for those that want to ensure projects are innovative but ethically grounded.
Yeah, again, I think if I were to be critical of Silicon Valley, and most of my students go to Silicon Valley, so I'm very attuned to what's happening out there. I think that, back to my other point, the one thing that is lacking is kind of the skill set to play devil's advocate and always be red teaming whatever it is that you're doing. And again, people don't want to red team because they don't want, they say, oh, you're just trying to put roadblocks. We don't need any roadblocks to technology. We'll solve these problems later. Maybe, but if that problem is not particularly solvable, and so, for example, right now, everybody's like, oh, we'll solve the hallucination problem. It's not a big deal. It's a huge deal, and we don't know how to solve it. We're not even close to coming up with a solution to this that doesn't involve layering in a bunch of other programs and human oversight that, kind of would make you ask the question, why would I even use this if I have to put all these other technologies on top of this? So, a measured approach and learning how to red team early on is going to be critical.
Christoph asked a comment in here. Is there a risk of an AI bubble like the .com bubble?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I don't think it's going to be quite as bad, but I will tell you, I'm going to be in business for a long time, because every time a company has a major problem or a crisis, technology isn't working, people have to figure out AI safety protocols, then they have to basically go back and spend the money that they should have spent early on in the development process. And, the problem is that if you'll do AI safety from the beginning, it'll cost you, but it will be a lot cheaper than if you have to do AI safety once you deploy a technology and then you have to retrofit it. It's going to be way more expensive.
I want to move on to the conversation regarding, female empowerment, the whole kind of basis of what we're doing here with this virtual series about empowering, inspiring, leading, and breaking down barriers, especially with the day coming tomorrow with International Women's Day. I am sure you have encountered many obstacles in these fields, right? These are traditionally male-dominated fields, and from the Navy to where you are now, how have you been able to overcome that? And especially in leadership positions. And this isn't just coming from me. There was a question that was submitted in advance about this as well.
Honestly, I just ignore it. And when I was younger, I was anxious about social interactions like most women. But I also was raised in a family where my dad, he believed and, really drilled it into our heads that you can do anything you want to do. And, you don't take any guff from anyone. And so, I may have been a little, stubborn and hard-headed. I was stubborn and hard-headed, but sometimes I just didn't even know what I was getting into. It's kind of like raising kids. Like, if you knew how hard that was, you'd be like, I don't know if I'm going to do that. But you do something and then there you are, and now you have to deal with it. So I would tell people, don't overthink anything. And, to a healthy extent, don't care what anybody else thinks if you really have a lot of solid convictions. That being said, you should also be open to criticism. And one of the things I learned in the Navy as a fighter pilot is after every flight, you would come back to a room and everyone would tear you apart, everything that you did wrong. And that was every day where your performance would be ripped to shreds every day, but you got better, and you got better fast, and you had to do it as a fighter pilot because, people's lives were on the line. And so at the end of every day, I'd still try to rip myself to shreds every day. I review what I did that day. And then, I try to make a plan for process improvement and person improvement. And so that's one of the reasons why I can, continue to succeed, because I'm always constantly trying to adapt, but it takes a lot. I mean, it's a lot of effort and to, a lot of mental effort and, be willingness to change and adapt. But it keeps you young, I'll tell you that.
Well, and that's solid advice for anyone that wants to pursue bigger, better things, right? So this is something we can all take to mind. You also discussed, Professor, at the beginning of the call, some of the things that you're trying to focus on too with AI is this element of bias and trying to eliminate that in some of these models. What is the biggest value then that a woman's voice and different unique voices bring to AI in order to eliminate these biases and, to make this AI future better and more inclusive?
So, I don't know if I would say it's really woman specific as much as it is different voice. And the problem in Silicon Valley, I mean, it's no secret that it's predominantly male and it's predominantly American and Asian American. And not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but when you get a very homogenous group of people developing technologies, then you get a lack of diversity in the thinking about a technology and the applications of those technologies. And then you end up, basically designing yourself into kind of a box that you really don't want to be in. And, having different voices in the room, women, people of color, in academia, we're horrible. Academia, we're such hypocrites. Everybody says, oh, we really value diversity and we're trying really hard to make sure that we have different voices in the room. But what you won't find in academia in America is diversity within a single department. Academia is really, and the more elite the university, the worse it is. So for example, if you want to be in Harvard or Yale and you want to be in their computer science departments, they have very, very strong, really not very flexible ideas about what it means to be in computer science. But this is one of the reasons I came to Mason, is because I was tired of universities claiming to be diverse, yet when it came to diversity of research, they would not tolerate that. And indeed, that's a huge problem, because since we don't have diversity in research, everybody keeps researching the same thing and we keep not making progress. And so it's a good example of, don't be a hypocrite. When you say diversity is important, really, you need to make sure that you look at your organization from all angles of diversity and really figure out, I have all sorts of people of color. Well, great, good for you, but do you also have diversity of thought?
Very good point. There's a lot of work to be done, kind of on all sides of things regarding this, because this is not just the AI field, right? This is relevant for Hollywood. This is relevant for, any business that you're working in, the news industry and media. Difference equals better quality, right? We're covering right. Sense, makes more sense. So regarding AI and just this evolving field where things are constantly changing, how are you managing to stay up to date with what's happening now, with the present, with the future? I mean, this has got to be a lot to keep up with. I don't know how you sleep.
Well, first of all, it's why I became a college professor, because my students keep me young. They keep me thinking young. They keep me exposed to all sorts of new topics. So, being part of the academic environment, it's not my peers who really challenge my thinking, it's my students. So that's really great. But I also, I do participate on social media. I'm not a heavy user by any stretch, but I do think checking in on it every now and then helps. And, I also have feeders, like I go out and make sure I get these summary documents here, there, and the other, where not through any kind of large language model. But I make sure that I have automated alerts for all sorts of the fields that I'm interested in, so I don't miss anything major. So I do think information management, especially today, is more difficult because you have to know which ones to get and which ones to ignore. And it does raise your workload for you to have to like look instead of, I would love it if ChatGPT could reliably summarize the news for me, but it can't. So I have to go look at it myself. But there's actually benefit to me in doing so because I remember it better if I have to go look for it.
I want to interject a question very quickly from Aldona, because this is very relevant. This goes back to the democracy component, but is artificial intelligence a threat to political elections beyond the misinformation and disinformation aspect? You know, obviously the elections, the presidential elections are coming up in the United States. I know that's something that's on everyone's mind right now. And, you know, the government is focusing on that too.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it is a threat. You know, I think the real question is, you know, how to quantify that threat. I'm not sure, you know, in my mind, all this disinformation, misinformation, you know, it's people are in echo chambers. So, you know, we're very divisive in America. This is the most divisive that this country has been in a very long time. And people seek out information to reinforce their already existing opinions. So, you know, while there might be a few people who could potentially be influenced by some misinformation or disinformation, I think the real problem with those issues are that it just increases divisiveness and rancor and anger. And, you know, it's not helping people to try to see some kind of middle ground. So I think this is going to be a tough year for the US.
And thanks, Aldona, for chiming in there. I know we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask a few more, one or two, depending upon timing, on the future, because there's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of careers that are in question right now that will be replaced by AI or have already been replaced. So what can we do about that? And how do we prepare for that?
You know, there really haven't been a lot of jobs replaced by, when we say straight up AI. You know, we could argue maybe some journalists have been replaced, but I'm not really sure that that's a legit argument because people are just reading less. And so with those journalists, are they really being replaced by AI, or are people are just moving to different types of medium or media? So, you know, I have a 16-year-old daughter. She does not watch TV. The idea of watching TV is antithetical to her being. And if I try to get her to sit down and watch a movie with me, she screams and wails because she just wants to see things on YouTube and TikTok. And, you know, so, and I think that Hollywood is being threatened, rightly so. They need to be threatened. And so things are changing. And so, you know, if we look back in time and we say, you know, elevator operators lost their job, that's a good thing. They should have lost their job. It was boring. And, you know, it's demeaning to humans to do repetitive jobs that just, you know, require no thought and, you know, really don't challenge their thinking. It's not good for them. You know, it's actually not even healthy. Jobs that challenge your thinking help you stay away from dementia and Alzheimer's. So I think when we start talking about the dignity of work, we've got to remember, you know, yes, does cotton picking, for example, it might provide jobs for people who don't have a lot of skill sets, but it's demeaning work. And I would rather have automation do that and not have repetitive stress injuries and not have people with higher rates of dementia and Alzheimer's. What I think we should do then is, if they made me a regulator, I would tax companies who had automation and AI. And that tax would fund reskilling programs and education programs so that people could get reskilled. You know, AI, we are about to see an explosion of AI maintenance people. this job does not exist right now, but it's going to have to exist both to stay in keeping with, for example, European regulations, but also just to keep up with the dynamic changes in the demands for what AI can and can't do. So I am not pessimistic at all about the loss of jobs. If there's really any job that could be legitimately replaced by Gen AI, I mean, that trust me, those companies are going to go bankrupt, because you cannot rely on a technology that is so error prone. But it's probably going to change the way that people make movies and the technology to make movies, and how we, all right, so Gen AI can make some movies, but it's going to actually take a lot of hand editing and detail oriented jobs that require more education. So, I think that the future is bright, but I think it's up to the media. I think it's the media's job to scare you so that you keep clicking.
I know we've reached 5 o'clock here in Warsaw, but I know we dropped you for about a minute. Do you have another minute just for me to ask one final question?
Yeah, I have a couple more minutes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And Gosha at the embassy, are we okay with just asking one more question? Because I think this is one people want to hear about. All right, good to go. We've gotten the green flag. Okay, so last but certainly not least, as we discuss the future, what is the world going to look like 10 years from now with artificial intelligence? I know you probably don't have the crystal ball, but if you could, what do you see?
I think you'll see a few more robotic capabilities coming online. I don't think I don't think the world is going to be a completely different place, but I think that there'll be more automation tailored to, for example, fast food restaurants and maybe delivery robots. And, so there'll be a little bit more that really leverages AI. I think that we are going to have, the news that we consume and the way that we consume media will be a little bit different. And, we will start, there will be a lot more emphasis on how to verify that the news that you're getting is real and the images that you're getting are real. So, I don't see a dramatic change. I think that the changes that we will see will be very similar to the last 10 years. Yeah, we've changed, and Hollywood may be really suffering in 10 more years, but competition is a good thing. And my daughter, who by then will be 26, won't care at all about movies. So what is that going to say about where we need to go? Change is scary, but we'll adapt, and we'll be better in 10 years than we are today.
All right, so I will leave everyone with the last words, which I will quote you, Professor. So we all remember: do not trust, verify, right?
That's right.
Got it. Professor, thank you so very much for this interesting conversation. Thank you everyone for logging on, for your questions, for your input. We really appreciate it. And we hope to have many more conversations in this virtual series. Bravo, we really appreciate it. We learned a lot, and we will take all that info with us and hopefully become more informed because of it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, bye everyone.
Bye-bye.